How Sacha Baron Cohen turned Borat into a social experiment disguised as a joke. But here's where it really explodes. October 30th, 2006. David Letterman, a guy who's interviewed everyone from presidents to rock stars, sits across from what appears to be a Central Asian journalist in a cheap gray suit. "Thank you so much for being here," Letterman says with his usual professionalism. The response? "And my wife is dead." Pause. "I'm sorry to hear that." Then, without missing a beat, high five. The audience erupts. Letterman looks like he's been hit by a truck. He's trying to steer the conversation somewhere normal, anywhere normal. But this guy keeps talking about taking photographs of women in bathrooms and playing ping-pong disco dance. You can see it in Letterman's eyes. This man has no idea what he's gotten himself into. And that confusion? That's the whole point. Here's where the mask falls off. A few weeks later, Borat hit theaters, and it didn't feel like a normal movie release. There were no fancy premieres, no safe press junkets. It just appeared, like someone had smuggled it into multiplexes while the studios weren't paying attention. You walked in expecting a dumb comedy about a foreign guy making fun of America. You walked out realizing you just watched America make fun of itself, and it didn't even know it was happening. The film was shot like a travel documentary, handheld cameras following this fictional Kazakh reporter as he stumbled through the United States, asking questions no reasonable person would ask, and doing things no sane person would do. But the genius wasn't in what Borat did. It was in what everyone else did when he did it. The real chaos starts here. Sacha Baron Cohen didn't invent the mockumentary. He didn't invent cringe comedy or hidden camera pranks either. What he did was weaponize politeness. He figured out that if you act clueless enough, if you smile wide enough, if you seem harmless enough, people will let you say almost anything. And not only will they let you say it, they'll help you say it. They'll nod along. They'll try to be accommodating. And in trying not to be rude to you, they'll reveal things about themselves they'd never say out loud in normal circumstances. That's the trap. Borat isn't the joke. He's the bait. The people around him, the real Americans who signed releases thinking they'd be in some foreign documentary, they're the punchline. But listen to this. The plot of Borat is almost non-existent, and that's entirely intentional. Borat Sagdiyev arrives in America to make a documentary about the greatest country in the world. He sees Pamela Anderson on Baywatch, falls instantly in love, and decides to drive across the country to California to marry her. That's it. That's the entire story. But the story doesn't matter because it's just an excuse, a thin wire holding together a series of increasingly uncomfortable encounters with actual Americans who have no idea they're participating in something that will become a cultural phenomenon. Cohen drops his character into rodeos, dinner parties, car dealerships, etiquette lessons, and even a Pentecostal church service. And in each location he does the same thing. He says something outrageous, waits to see how people react, and then pushes a little further. This is where it all falls apart. What makes Borat different from every other prank show is the commitment. Cohen never breaks character, not once, not even for a second. There's no wink at the camera, no moment where he lets the audience in on the joke. He is Borat, completely and totally, in every frame. And because he's so committed, the people around him can't tell if he's serious or not. So they make a choice. Most of them choose to be polite. They choose to smile, to nod, to go along with it, even when he's saying things that should make them walk away immediately. A driving instructor stays calm when Borat yells at a woman driver. A gun store owner recommends the best weapon to shoot Jews. A group of Southern socialites tries to maintain composure when Borat brings a bag of his own feces to their dinner table. They don't throw him out. They freeze. They try to process it and stay civil at the same time. And then came the bombshell. That etiquette dinner scene might be the perfect example of how the whole film works. You've got this group of well-mannered Southerners, dressed in their finest, genuinely trying to teach this strange foreigner about proper American table manners. They're patient, they're kind, they're explaining which fork to use and how to sit properly. Borat listens carefully, asks questions, seems genuinely interested in learning. Then he excuses himself to use the bathroom and comes back carrying a plastic bag. He walks up to the hostess and hands it to her, explaining very matter-of-factly that he's made waste and isn't sure what to do with it. The room goes silent. Nobody screams. Nobody laughs. They just stare at this bag in complete shock, trying to figure out what the appropriate response is to being handed human feces at a dinner party. It gets worse. But Cohen doesn't stop there. After an awkward attempt to recover, Borat asks if he can bring a guest to dinner. The hostess, still trying to be accommodating, says she supposes that would be fine. Then Borat brings in Lunel, a black prostitute he met earlier in his journey. And suddenly, instantly, you see the real boundary. Everything before this, the crude language, the bizarre behavior, the literal bag of shit, they were willing to tolerate all of that in the name of being good hosts. But this? A black woman at their dinner table? The temperature in the room drops 20 degrees. The smiles vanish. Someone asks him to leave. And just like that, you realize what the movie has been doing this whole time. It's not about shocking people with gross-out humor. It's about finding the line where politeness ends and actual values begin. This next part? Straight up wild. The driving lesson scene operates on a similar principle, but with a different tone. The instructor is calm, professional, genuinely trying to teach Borat how to drive. He's got infinite patience, even when Borat can barely work the pedals or understand basic road signs. They're cruising through New York City traffic, and the instructor is pointing out landmarks, explaining rules of the road, doing his job. Then Borat sees a woman driving and immediately starts yelling about how dangerous she is, how women shouldn't be allowed to drive. The instructor chuckles nervously, not sure if this is a joke or a cultural difference or what. But he doesn't shut it down. He just redirects, tries to get back to the lesson. Borat asks what kind of car attracts women with a shaved vagina. The instructor pauses, processes, then actually tries to answer the question. He's so locked into being helpful that he can't recognize when he should just end the session and kick this guy out of his car. Here's where the truth hits hard. The rodeo sequence takes everything up another level because it puts Borat in front of a crowd, not just one or two people. He's at an actual rodeo in Virginia, and somehow he's been given a microphone to address the audience before the event starts. The crowd has no idea who he is. They think he's some kind of foreign dignitary or guest of honor. Borat starts by saying he supports the war in Iraq. He supports George Bush, and the crowd cheers. They're loving this guy. Then he says he hopes America will one day kill every terrorist, and the cheers get louder. He's telling them exactly what they want to hear, and they're eating it up. Then he starts singing the Kazakh national anthem, which is actually just a bunch of nonsense. But he does it with such conviction that people stand up, hands over hearts, respecting what they think is another country's anthem. Then, at the very end, he says, "May George Bush drink the blood of every man, woman, and child in Iraq." And you can feel the crowd shift. Some people are still cheering because they missed what he actually said. Others are starting to realize something's wrong. A few are booing. But most of them are just confused, caught between patriotism and the growing sense that they've been had. Now here's where it gets insane. The film doesn't just rely on these big set pieces. There are dozens of smaller moments that are just as revealing. Borat walks into a pet store and asks what kind of dog would be best to protect him from Jews. The employee doesn't blink, just starts recommending large breeds. Borat goes to a humor coach to learn American jokes and ends up workshopping offensive material about his wife. And the coach tries to guide him towards something more appropriate, but never actually stops the session. Social media was barely a thing. YouTube was a year old. Twitter had just launched. The idea of something going viral was still new. But Borat understood the power of uncomfortable moments long before everyone had a camera in their pocket. It understood that people would rather film something horrible than stop it, that they'd rather stay polite than take a stand. And nearly 20 years later, that's only gotten more true. We live in a world where people will watch someone get harassed and pull out their phones instead of helping. Where outrage is performative, but action is rare. Borat predicted all of it. Things went downhill fast. Cohen has made other characters, other films. Ali G, Bruno, The Dictator, the Borat sequel. Some of them worked, some didn't. But none of them had the same impact as the original Borat. Maybe because the element of surprise was gone. Maybe because people knew the trick by then. Or maybe because Borat hit at exactly the right moment, when America was uncomfortable enough to laugh at itself, but not uncomfortable enough to actually change anything. The film was released in 2006, deep into the Iraq War, during a time when patriotism and paranoia were at a peak. It asked questions people didn't want to answer and showed behaviors people didn't want to see. And it did all of that while making you laugh so hard you could barely breathe. Brace yourself for this one. So what is Borat, really? Is it a comedy? Yes. Is it a documentary? Kind of. Is it a social experiment? Absolutely. Is it offensive? Definitely. Is it brilliant? That depends on whether you think exposing ugliness is the same as endorsing it. Because that's the line the film walks, constantly, without ever picking a side. It shows you horrible things and trusts you to know they're horrible without explaining why. It lets people condemn themselves with their own words and actions. And it does all of this while dressed up as the dumbest movie you've ever seen. That's the magic trick. You think you're watching some clueless guy in a bad suit. You're actually watching a mirror. It turns darker from here. Because once you see Borat for what it really is, it's hard to watch the same way again. The jokes don't land as easy. The pranks feel heavier. You start noticing the pauses, the moments where someone could have said no, but didn't. You start wondering what you would have done in those situations. Would you have stayed polite? Would you have played along? Or would you have been the one person to stand up and say, "This isn't okay"? Most people like to think they'd be the hero in that scenario. But Borat shows us, over and over, that most people aren't. Most people just want to avoid conflict. And that passivity, that desire to keep things comfortable, is exactly what lets bad things happen. And that's when the tables turned. Sacha Baron Cohen took a ridiculous character, gave him a terrible mustache and a worse suit, and used him to show America something it didn't want to see about itself. He proved that people will tolerate almost anything if you're polite enough about it. That the line between humor and horror is thinner than we like to admit. That sometimes the best way to expose a problem is to make people laugh at it first, and only later realize what they were actually laughing at. Borat is stupid, hilariously stupid. But it's also one of the smartest comedies of the last 20 years. And the more people try to brush it off as just a dumb movie, the more it proves its point. Because if a guy this ridiculous can walk into a room and make people show who they really are without even trying, maybe the real joke isn't him. Maybe it's us.